Hello and welcome to the Starting Sisters series, this series where we go from your first purchase to your first 2000 point army list and everything in between for the 9th edition Adepta Sororitas, also known as the Sisters of Battle. In this video we'll be looking at the one order that we left out in the previous video, where we covered all of the other orders that the sisters can choose from, this order being the Order of Our Martyred Lady. And if it was only for the base Codex, the Order of Our Martyred Lady would have been an order that fell in the lower middle of the pack of orders, maybe even one that was contending for one of the lowest orders out there. But thanks to a new supplement within the Warzone Charadon rules known as the Book of Fire, it has gained quite a lot of special rules, and it is a far more interesting order that can actually be a contender for first place because of how much it has access to in comparison to other orders, thanks to everything it gains in that supplement. To begin looking at the Order of Our Martyred Lady, let us begin by looking at what the basic codex offers this order in specific. Like all orders, the Order of Our Martyred Lady has access to the conviction buffs, and their conviction is known as Blood of the Martyrs. What Blood of the Martyrs does is, the first part says that you gain a miracle dice at the end of any phase except the morale phase, in which a unit with this conviction was destroyed. This is in addition to gaining one for a character being destroyed as well. And as mentioned previously, the miracle dice are a rather powerful commodity that is somewhat rare to the army as a whole, and being able to gain them much more easily thanks to this conviction is a powerful ability to have. And I'll say this much, this actually also ties in to a lot of what that the Order of the Sacred Rose can do by feeding some of those secondary objectives that benefit from you having miracle dice. And as a whole, this does favor a more MSU style of play, although the second half of this conviction is a little bit different, and the second half of the conviction reads, add 1 to the hit roll of units that are below starting strength, and as this wants you to lose models within a unit but retain the unit as a whole. This part of the order disfavors MSU builds, but I wouldn't say the second half is important enough to skew builds of the Order of Our Martyred Lady from wanting to benefit from that first half of the conviction. So in a sense, the conviction for this order is in a little bit of a conflict with itself, although the second half can still be functional with MSU units. It's just a little harder to enable, and there are going to be times where even your smallest units end up doing rather well thanks to the second half of this conviction, and the first half will be benefiting your army as a whole thanks to those extra miracle dice that you gain from this conviction. Moving on to the Warlord trait. The Warlord trait for the Order of Our Martyred Lady is known as the Shield Bearer, and the Shield Bearer Warlord trait is actually rather good. This Warlord trait has 3 different parts to it, and while 2 parts are more of a tertiary benefit, the first part is rather strong in its own, being that all damage the bearer takes is reduced by 1 to a minimum of 1. We've seen abilities like this in the past, and they're usually rather strong thanks to the amount of weapons that can deal 2 damage. And it's never bad to have this kind of ability, especially when you consider you gain other benefits for having this ability as well. So what are these other abilities that you gain for having this trait? Well, the first one is, if the bearer of this trait destroys an enemy unit, the miracle dice you gain from the vengeance part of the miracle dice ability is a 6 automatically. And remember, the vengeance part of the miracle dice ability is that a unit with the Acts of Faith ability has destroyed an enemy unit, and in this case, if the bearer of this trait has done this, then you gain a 6 automatically instead of having to roll for it. The third part of this trait says, if you gain a miracle dice from a character or the Warlord being destroyed, that dice is automatically a 6 as well. In other words, as the bearer of this trait destroys things or is destroyed or witnesses other characters being destroyed, you gain better miracle dice than you would normally gain, on top of that damage reduction that's already rather powerful by itself. All in all, I'd say this is definitely an interesting Warlord trait that not only benefits the bearer of this trait, but also benefits the army thanks to those 2 other abilities that it has beyond the damage reduction ability. After the Warlord trait, there is a relic known as the Martyr's Vengeance. The Martyr's Vengeance upgrades an Inferno pistol on a character, replacing the Inferno pistol with one that has a 12-inch range, a pistol 1-shot, a strength of 9, 4 armor penetration, and a d6 plus 3 damage profile. As a whole, this is actually a rather impressive pistol considering it hits harder than most las cannons within the game. That being said, it only has 1 shot, and it's still a pistol weapon that does replace an Inferno pistol to begin with. And Inferno pistols are rather good on their own, considering they basically have a profile of a melt-a-gun. So is it really worth it to replace an Inferno pistol with this special relic? I would say it probably isn't, considering other relics can give you a lot more mileage out of them than this one can, as you'll be limited to a number of times you can shoot it, and with a range of only 12 inches, it will be limiting in terms of how many times you can shoot it within a game and how easy it'll be to get to different targets that you can take advantage of this pistol's high damage output. That being said, it could be a little bit of fun to play around with once in a while, though as a whole, I would generally not take this weapon over other options. And this sounds contrary to some of the other weapons I preferred within the Sisters of Battle, but at the end of the day, those relic weapons are generally putting out way more volume of damage than this weapon does. whether it's because it contributes quite a few mortal wounds, or it simply has such a high volume of attacks that it can make up for being a 1-unit weapon. Finally, the last basic benefit of the order, without going into special characters or supplement rules, is the stratagem, as all orders have, and the stratagem for the Order of Our Martyred Lady is Honor the Martyrs. For one command point, you can select an Order of Our Martyred Lady character, and when that character is destroyed, this stratagem gives all future attacks made by units within the Order of Our Martyred Lady +1 to their wound roll against that target. This isn't the best ability to have, as it does require to lose a character, but it does give you the ability to sacrifice a character to a frightening target and then buff the rest of shooting against the target significantly when it comes to wounding that target. Meaning that if you have something across the table from you that's a frightening enemy and you wish to be able to prioritize the targeting of it, you can try slowing it down by feeding it one of your characters and then using the stratagem in order to debuff it so that your other units can finish it off. It's a bit of a niche use case, but there are going to be situations where you're going to want to use this against something like an enemy Mortarion or other such targets. This stratagem is going to be something you're going to have to consider very heavily before using, as you are giving up quite a bit in order to enable it. Though once again, you do gain some benefits for losing characters within this order and within the Sisters of Battle as a whole. So it's not like this is all you gain for losing that character, but it still is quite an expensive price to pay for what you get out of this. Though in many cases, you're not really going to make use of stratagem all that much. The Order of Our Martyred Lady has one other special benefit that other orders don't have within the main codex, that being the character Junith Eruita. Junith Eruita acts as a force multiplier character that has a rather cool model. She has seen a bit of a loss of power, not only due to rules changes, but also the introduction of new characters. However, she's still perfectly fine and gives the Order of Our Martyred Lady some extra utility that other orders don't have. Junith Eruita comes in at a total of 130 points, which is slightly up from her 8th edition Incarnation, despite having more competition and the very slight downgrade that she received. For stat line, Junith Eruita has actually a rather reasonable stat line, with a 10-inch movement, a 2+ ballistic and weapon skill, and has more survivability than your basic sister, coming in with a toughness of 4, a 3+ normal save, and a 4+ invulnerable save, thanks to her Rosarius. She benefits from all of the basic abilities, such as Acts of Faith, Sacred Rites, and Shield of Faith, which are all perfectly good abilities to have in order to gain some extra utility and power as a whole. In terms of weapons, she comes with a pair of Ministorum Heavy Flamers as her only ranged weapons, and these flamers give her 2d6 heavy shots at a 12-inch range, with a strength of 6, 1 armor penetration, and 1 damage. Like all flamer weapons, these automatically hit, and do remember that Junith Eruita is actually a vehicle character, meaning that she can shoot these flamers within close combat like all vehicles would be able to, giving her quite a bit more power within close combat itself. And speaking of close combat, she does come with a rather good weapon known as the Mace of Castigation. The Mace of Castigation gives her an additional 3 strength, bringing her up to a total of 6 strength, with an armor penetration value of 2 and 2 damage per hit at her 4 base attacks with a weapon skill of 2. This actually makes her rather potent in combat when you take the mace in combination with the heavy flamers that she carries, and as such, she can put out quite a lot of damage when fighting enemies within close combat or at short ranges against swarm units. And at the beginning I mentioned that Junith Eruita was a force multiplier, and as such she brings quite a few different benefits to units around her as well. To begin looking at her different abilities that benefit other units, she comes with the Lead the Righteous aura, which is the same as a basic Canonist, and considering she is a Canonist superior, it does make sense why she would have a Canonist ability. The Lead the Righteous aura allows Order core units within 6 inches to reroll 1s to hit when making attacks. This is pretty reasonable, and it's definitely not a bad ability to have access to in that situation. After that, she has the Pulpit of St. Holland's Basilica aura, which her pulpit gives off, and it says Sorority infantry models wholly within 6 inches of Junith Eruita gain the benefits of light cover against range attacks. This is a minor buff to their defense, although it is a bit of a reduction from the previous benefit that increased their save from their Sacred Shield ability, giving them a bit more survivability in that end, though this still helps some units survive against range attacks as they move across the board or hang back and shoot at enemy models. Finally, she has 2 last abilities, the first one being the Fiery Conviction ability, which says you can select an Order core unit or character unit within 6 inches, and they can roll the hit roll as a whole when making attacks instead of just ones like the Lead the Righteous ability allows them to do. And considering this works both in melee and range, it does have applications in both situations. I think due to the stats and the weapons that Junith Eruita carries, she might actually be a better melee character than one that hangs back and supports range units like she did in the past. I can definitely see a world in which she has scored something like the Repentia or the sacrosancts into combat and helps them survive with that Basilica order while they make their way into combat, as it helps them save against range attacks that are made against them. And the final one last ability she has that also contributes to her ability within close combat is that because she is a vehicle, she does explode when destroyed. So in the situation that she is destroyed, you roll a d6, and on a roll of 6, she deals 1 mortal wound to units within 6 inches of her model. This could be rather good to deal the last bits of damage to enemies when she does finally go down, if that happens to occur. As a whole, I think we'll definitely see less of Junith Eruita going into the future, simply because she might be a little overcost at this point, and she has seen a little bit more of a downgrade, while other characters such as Celestine have seen a major upgrade. In addition to that, we see new characters like Morven Val, who are incredibly competitive and can do quite a lot of things for a better points investment than Junith Eruita. That being said, I do see a world in which she can make an appearance upon the tabletop, and I wouldn't count her out just yet, considering all the things that the Order of the Martyred Lady can do. Now that we've covered everything that the basic codex has to offer for the Order of our Martyred Lady, we can turn our attention to the supplement for the Warzone Charadon campaign, known as the Book of Fire. The Book of Fire adds a slew of additional Warlord traits, relics, and a ton of stratagems that only the Order of our Martyred Lady has access to. Though before we look at each of those individually, I'd like to take a look at a combination of a few things from the supplement and basic codex. For a long time now, there has been a build known as the Becky for the Order of the Bloody Rose, using the relic weapon Beneficence and various stratagems as well as warlord traits to elevate a basic Canis to an unofficial character that was named by the Warhammer community. And while the Becky build may still be possible, I think there is another build that is now equally as powerful in the Order of our Martyred Lady. I don't know if this build has a name yet, but I'd like to propose that our friendship with Becky has ended, and now Jenny is our new best friend. So what makes a Jenny build? Well, we begin with a Canis as normal, and then offer her the new Martyred Lady Warlord trait from the Book of Fire called Martyr's Strength, which simply reads that the bearer gains 1 strength and 1 attack for every wound that they are missing, to a maximum benefit of a total of 2. This doesn't seem like much, as it just buffs the attack output a little as the character becomes damaged. But what takes it over the top is that there is also a new relic known as the Blade of Sacrifice, which upgrades a power sword to this new relic weapon. The blade has the same profile as a power sword, giving the bearer +1 strength, 3 armor penetration, and 1 damage per attack. Although it has one very important special rule, being that when the bearer attacks, the bearer can pay 1 to 2 of their own wounds, and if they do, when they successfully wound an enemy, instead of their normal damage, they deal mortal wounds equal to the health that they paid during that round. This means that Jenny can deal an absurd amount of mortal wounds with this weapon and trait, considering she'll have a weapon skill of 2+, a strength profile of 6, and a total of 6 attacks that deal 2 mortal wounds when she wounds the enemy if she paid with her own health that turn. When she doesn't wish to pay with her health, she still has a profile of a power sword with the additional strength and attacks from the trait, as well as any other benefits that she may have as a result of other abilities. If the potential of this many mortal wounds in melee combat against other characters wasn't enough to make this build appealing to you, don't forget, if she dies in combat against the enemy character, you can use the basic Codex Order of our Martyred Lady stratagem to finish that enemy off with other units, or you can utilize the Divine Intervention stratagem to bring back the Jenny Canoness in hopes of her finishing the job and continuing to fight on. One last thing to make the Jenny even more interesting is that the Book of Fire has a stratagem known as Exemplar of the Order, which for 1 command point lets you select a Martyred Lady character that's your Warlord and give them 1 additional Warlord trait from the Book of Fire that has to be unique from other traits. This is a great way to take the Martyr Strength in addition to another Warlord trait to make Jenny a truly frightening character that your opponent has to deal with. Though do keep in mind, this forces the Canis to be your Warlord, meaning that any characters that must be your Warlord in the situation that they are taken cannot be taken alongside the Jenny Canoness if you decide to use a stratagem. Though if you're okay with foregoing one of those other characters, the Jenny can be an incredibly powerful unit that can do quite a lot of damage against enemy characters, and because you are within the Order of our Martyred Lady, you gain quite a few different benefits when she does happen to go down, and I think she works incredibly well with the base Warlord trait that the Order of our Martyred Lady has to offer, as it allows her to tank quite a bit. Though other Warlord traits may be just as interesting, and we'll take a deeper look into her when we start building our lists, as there's quite a lot to cover when looking at the different Canises and other characters within the Sisters of Battle forces. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the other benefits that the Book of Fire offers the Order of our Martyred Lady. The first thing they gain are a few Warlord traits that are a bit interesting, but I wouldn't say that they actually stand out enough in comparison to Martyr Strength. The first of these other Warlord traits is Saintly Example. And what Saintly Example says is, in addition to this trait, randomly generate a trait for this Warlord from the Warlord traits available in the Basic Sisters Codex. And in addition to that, this trait also says, when the Warlord dies, choose a new Order of our Martyred Lady character that doesn't have a trait and give her a Warlord trait that no other model in your army has. This Warlord trait cannot be Saintly Example, and this model counts as your Warlord for objectives and other rules that are concerned with your Warlord specifically. This is a rather creative trait, and if you don't mind generating a random Warlord trait in order to gain some extra mileage out of how your Warlord functions, this might be something fun to play around with. You can use this to bait your opponent into thinking they have destroyed your Warlord for one of their objectives or other special abilities, only to realize that your Warlord is actually somewhere else completely and they failed to accomplish their objective. In addition to that, you have some ability to play around with the Warlord trait that you choose when this occurs, giving you a little more flexibility in terms of how you play your army. That being said, I think the drawback of having to randomly generate a Warlord trait and then having to lose that character before the second part of this ability kicks in is a bit more than you'd like to give up for what you gain by using this ability. Although I will say I'm rather happy that it's a creative ability and it shows that they're trying out new and different things in terms of how they make some of these traits, which is always good to see, as sometimes Warlord traits can feel a little bit stagnant. The second Warlord trait that we haven't covered yet is the St. Catherine's Legacy. This Warlord trait has two different parts to it, just like the previous Warlord trait. The first part of this Warlord trait says, activate the spirit of the martyr's sacred rite for this Warlord in addition to any other sacred rites. That's definitely okay, though I don't think that's actually something you really care about because the spirit of the martyr only gives you benefits when the character goes down. Once again, it's very thematic to what the Order of our Martyred Lady wants to do, but once again, it only kicks in when you actually lose this character, making it a much weaker ability than you would like it to be. That being said, the aura isn't much different in that it's called St. Catherine's Legacy, and St. Catherine's Legacy is an aura that says Order of our Martyred Lady units within 6 inches that have Spirit of the Martyr active triggered on a 5+ instead of a 6. This is a nice little bit of extra utility if you're using the Spirit of the Martyr, or you have simply gained it from one of your other abilities on a unit, meaning this Warlord trait would probably be best on something like a Dogmata who can give additional sacred rites to different units using her Hymns of War. Though that being said, once again, it's quite a lot of investment and requires you to be losing units in order for you to utilize it. The Spirit of the Martyr isn't the worst ability in the world to have, though it is definitely not the strongest one either, and buffing it in this manner does not necessarily guarantee that you would get significant value out of it. In many cases, your opponent will be able to play around this ability. In addition to that, you'll be giving up one of the other sacred rites that will usually do a lot more work for you within the course of a game, as well as a Warlord trait that can give you a lot more benefit. Though as I said with the other Warlord trait, this is a very creative trait that explores a lot of design space using other rules within the army to create new combinations and elevate those abilities to new levels. That being said, neither of these Warlord traits is that interesting, but I really applaud the creativity and attempt at making something new while being very thematic with how they've addressed a lot of these Warlord traits. Moving on from the different Warlord traits, we come to the different relics that the Book of Fire offers to the Order of our Martyred Lady. We've already looked at the Blade of Sacrifice, but let's look at the other relics that can be selected from. The first of these relics is the Helm of the Fiery Heart, and what this helm does is once per game, you can activate this item to give the bearer a 2+ invulnerable save that can't be rerolled for any reason. This ability is rather cute but not particularly great, and there are just better options, so it'll be incredibly rare when you select this relic, if ever at all. Moving on from the Helm of the Fiery Heart, the Scepter of Vengeance is an item that can be taken by the Dogmata. This scepter upgrades the Dogmata's mace to give her a strength profile of 2 times her strength, 2 armor penetration, and 2 damage per attack. In addition to that, it has a special ability that says you add 1 to the wound roll against Tyranids. And while this weapon can be fun in some narrative or casual games where you're playing against Tyranids and know your opponent ahead of time so that you can play with an item that isn't particularly powerful, but at least is thematic and flavorful, I'm not a big fan of weapons such as this because from a competitive standpoint and a standpoint where you don't know what your opponent is playing, it doesn't do as much as other weapons do, and it can be downright useless. At least with some weapons that target psychers, which may not be included in every single army, have applications against multiple armies, where this is specifically applicable against one type of army, and the special ability has no effect against other armies. That being said, the special effect that targets a specific army is minor enough that it shouldn't swing things too heavily, and it won't make games specifically binary. So as a whole, I can't be that upset about this weapon, and I think it's a perfectly fine weapon in terms of flavor and fun games. Though that being said, once again, it's a relic that's not particularly good. And finally, there's one last relic, being the Kandala Scroll. The Kandala Scroll can only be taken by an Imagifier, and the Imagifier who takes this relic once per game can activate this ability to gain the Kandala Scroll aura, which stays until the start of your next command phase. This model has an aura that gives core units as well as characters from the Order of our Martyred Lady that are wholly within 6 inches of the bearer 1 extra attack. It's a fun little ability, but considering things like Warhim and other such abilities, it's again one of those things that's just not that great. Really, this could have been a permanent aura and it still would have been just fine. All of these relics are definitely creative and fun, but the power level isn't that exciting. But considering how much this order has gained, it's not the end of the world to have a few weak options in addition to all of the other good stuff that they have gained. And there's always the Blade of Sacrifice, which is actually a rather interesting relic, and it seems to be par for the course that supplements like this will usually have 1 to 2 very powerful relics, and then a set of relics that exist to be more flavorful and for more casual play. After the Warlord traits and the relics that the Book of Fire has to offer, it offers a slew of different stratagems that can be used by models within the Order of our Martyred Lady. Let's take a look at these different stratagems and what they do on the tabletop. The first of these stratagems is called Vengeance for Armageddon, and for 1 command point it says that the selected unit can reroll the hit roll when making melee attacks against orcs. Once again, this is one of those abilities that only works against a specific army, so I'm not the biggest fan of it, but once again, the flavor is very much there. For those of you who didn't play back in the day, Armageddon was a planet that was besieged by orcs and the homeworld of the famous Commissary Eric, who was considered to be immortal by the orcs, and as such was made so by their belief of him being immortal. It was a very interesting little campaign book that I have very fond memories of, despite not playing it particularly much. After that stratagem, we have the Zealous Death Wish, which for 1 command point gives +1 to hit against enemies with at least 5 more models in their squad than yours. Sisters can be a rather MSU army, and the rise of Tide armies such as Necrons, Skitarii squads, and more can give the stratagem some legs to stand on, though do keep in mind it's only +1 to hit, and you have to be going up against an enemy with far superior numbers to yourself. Though in certain situations, this is definitely going to be a perfectly fine stratagem that gives you some extra mileage, though don't tunnel vision it and don't expect it to do something incredibly impressive. It's more of something that gives you a little bit of extra benefit when you can use it because you're already planning to go into a situation where this would be naturally set up without you even having to depend on the stratagem. Following that is the Pious Machine Spirit Stratagem, and for 1 command point you can select a Martyred Lady vehicle with a wounds characteristic of 10 or more, and that vehicle counts as having full wounds for its bracket profile. Now, this is definitely an interesting stratagem as sisters don't have many ways to heal vehicles, meaning that bracketing vehicles against them is more of a viable stratagem than it is against a lot of other armies, so this counteracts that a bit and gives sisters a way of getting around some of their limitations when it comes to vehicles. After that stratagem is a stratagem known as Rejoice the Fallen, and for 2 command points, in your opponent's shooting phase, select a unit that was above half strength and dropped below half strength within that opponent's shooting phase. That unit can shoot as if it was your shooting phase. This stratagem seems very powerful at first glance, but it won't necessarily go off as often as you think, as your opponent will usually wipe out your unit before you're able to utilize it to its full effect. But when it does go off, it can be incredibly good, as it can give you that extra bit of firepower if your opponent happens to fail to wipe out a priority target, such as a unit of Retributors where some of the special weapons have survived. Even a basic sister squad that happen to include something like the Multi-Melta can put out a decent amount of firepower in some situations using this stratagem. And then we come to what I think is one of the best stratagems within the Book of Fire. This stratagem is called the Martyr's Pyre, and for 1 command point, you can select an Order of our Martyred Lady infantry unit in your shooting phase that is within an engagement range of an enemy. And for that shooting phase, flamer weapons within that unit become pistol weapons, meaning they can fire those flamers within engagement range. But for every model that's shot with their flamer weapon, you roll a d6, and on a 1, that model is destroyed, but it can shoot one last time before being destroyed. This is really good, as the chance to destroy is rather low, but the damage output is very high, and it makes it almost impossible for your opponent to lock out your Retributors in combat if they're carrying at least some flamers. Even if you lose a Retributor with this ability, you are still probably ahead, as they don't have the best melee profile, and unlocking the remaining Retributors while destroying the enemy is well worth the sacrifice. So as a whole, this is a very flavorful and very powerful stratagem, a great combination to have for anyone who wishes to play this order, as it gives you something special that other orders don't have access to. The stratagems continue with another great stratagem known as Death Before Disgrace. For 1 command point, you can select a Martyred Lady infantry or Paragon unit at the start of your movement phase, and that unit gains objective secured, but cannot fall back until the start of your next movement phase. If a model already has the objective secured ability, it counts as an additional model for purposes of objective secured. This is incredibly good, as 9th edition is an objective focused game, and the warsuits themselves can be rather tanky. They're still not the best unit in the game, even with the stratagem in mind, but it it does make them all the more appealing as well, as all of a sudden they can sit on those objectives and hold them rather effectively when it's needed. All in all, this is definitely going to be a stratagem you're going to use very often if you're within the Order of our Martyred Lady, as it's a very powerful one. They'll almost always have some application within the course of a given game. And finally, there's one last stratagem called a Martyr's Duty, and for one command point, this stratagem allows you to select a core Martyred Lady unit, and when a model is destroyed within that unit, roll a d6, and on a 4+, that model can shoot one of its ranged weapons, or make one melee attack with a weapon before being removed. I'm always a little bit indifferent towards abilities like this, but it's definitely not a bad ability, and sometimes it can be rather powerful, so it's always useful to have an ability such as this. It's by no means the weakest stratagem either, but it's not something you would want to use haphazardly because it can eat up more command points than you realize, though in some situations, such as being able to shoot multi-meltas on dying retributors is going to be a great boon to you, as all of a sudden you can put out the last bit of firepower that you need in order to take out a priority target, meaning that your opponent will have to play around the stratagem to some extent or suffer the consequences of having heavy fire returned to them in some situations. All in all, I would say the Book of Fire brings a lot to the table, and for the most part, none of the stratagems, relics, or warlord traits are particularly overpowered, and none of them in themselves make me believe that they would carry the Order of our Martyred Lady by themselves. Though that being said, the amount of different abilities you have, and a good handful of them, are rather strong. In addition to everything you get from the basic codex, the Order of our Martyred Lady has a lot of potential, and I think the sheer volume of stuff that they have access to is definitely something that's going to carry them into the future, and give them a lot of ability to be one of the top orders of the Sisters of Battle. And as always, if you've enjoyed the content, like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel out. And if you get the opportunity, please do share the channel, as that not only massively helps the channel, but also helps the people who may discover it and benefit from the content. I would also like to give a quick shout out to my patrons. You guys are awesome people. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. And regardless if you're a patron or not, thank you for watching and have a great day. See you next time. Bye.